Are the French rude? So in order to really answer the question as to whether or not the French are really rude, we need to take a look at French culture. One of the things that starts very early on in French culture that I think is something that creates a certain behavior amongst people is the bullying. And I would note that there isn't really a word in French that is the same as bullying. I was talking about it recently actually with my French teacher who has lived substantially, actually most of her career in the US, and she was sitting there and saying, yeah, we don't really have a good equivalent word for it. Bullying is very common in French culture, and it actually starts in schools. So in schools, kids are bullied by each other. They are also bullied by the teachers. And this is something that is very normal. I have talked about it before on this channel. I have tons and tons of friends who have told me about these horror stories of the bullying that happens in schools between other kids and also teachers. I have a really good friend who's also a teacher in a French school and has taught in quite a number of schools in France, and she talks about the same thing. So bullying is something that is very common, and it starts in the school, so it starts quite young, and then it even continues into adulthood. So I know someone who was telling me about how some of her French friends bully her when she tries to pronounce English words without a French accent and pronounce them correctly. And she was just talking about that, and I just thought, like, that's crazy. Whenever I speak French, I try to speak it as best as I can with a French accent, you know, with the right pronunciation. And she was just saying, yep, no, like, I have friends who really get on me and they make fun of me and whatever else. And I just thought, like, that's bullying, right? The bullying really is something that starts very early on, very young in the culture. In many respects, because it starts so young, I think it's just very normalized. And if you think about that, if you were bullied constantly every single day, that could create a hardness in you. That could create and lead to kind of a meanness in you. That could lead you to always kind of having your guard up and kind of ready to, like, go toe to toe with someone, right? Because frankly, I think that level of bullying, that's gonna mess with your mind, especially if it starts so young. I'll never forget, you know, maybe a couple of years ago, I was talking to a friend who was here visiting, and she said, you know, I was at this place and this woman was just so rude to me, and I was just looking at her like, why is she talking to me like this? And I said, oh girl, they talk to each other like that. Like, and she was just like, what? I was like, oh yeah, it's nothing personal. That's how they communicate with each other. And that is something that you will notice, and that I personally think might be something that comes from the bullying, is that you see people, they talk to each other in these like really crazy, mean, just angry, disrespectful ways, like with this attitude. And it's just normal. Like, they do it to each other, so when they're doing it to you, it's not necessarily personal, right? It's just like how they operate. And I think that has to somehow connect to that bullying, because that bullying is very much a part of the culture. There are some exceptions to this, and I will lay those out for you. So first and foremost, generally people who work with a lot of foreigners or work around a lot of foreigners, they generally kind of don't have that same level of just this like kind of meanness, hardness, like whatever else. They tend to be, frankly, just much more open and nicer. Additionally, the people who have lived outside of France for any sort of substantial period of time, they also tend to be much more open. You're generally not going to find any of that kind of hardness with them or any of that rudeness. You're generally going to start the interaction on kind of a much more open kind of perspective. Another exception are people who have parents who come from another culture. And this is even if they only have one parent from another culture. You will very, very rarely, if ever, see those individuals like with that level of kind of hardness or rudeness. You just don't. So essentially, it's just exposure to other cultures and curiosity about other cultures that I have personally witnessed makes people kind of like the exception to that kind of stereotypical French image of French people who are rude. Frankly, those are the people who just tend to be super, super nice. Now, obviously, I am not saying that this is rudeness, every French person is rude and every French person is mean, you know, even if they haven't, ever left France or whatever else, right? I am not saying that, and I know that there are going to be people who, even though I've said this, are going to still come into the comments because they only watch the first 2 minutes of the video, and they're going to come in there and they're going to be like, I'm French, and I'm going to have to delete your comment. I'm going to tell you that right now. So, so let me be clear. I am not saying that every person who, has not, lived outside of France or has a parent from a different culture or whatever else is rude. I am not saying that. I'm just saying that you do tend to see it very often. You tend to see that kind of hardness a lot, that I believe it comes from the bullying aspects of the culture. And generally, from my personal experience, the people who never seem to exhibit any of that kind of characteristic are people who haven't lived in France for long periods of time, who work a lot with international cultures, or frankly, who have a parent from another culture. So with that said, are the French really rude? Well, yes and no. I know personally I have encountered a higher level of this just resistance and meanness and frankly rudeness since moving to France that I don't encounter in Spain or Italy or Greece or the Netherlands, right? There's definitely a very, very high level of rude. And I'm not gonna sit here and deny that because that's definitely true. But is everyone rude? Well, no, of course not. Not everyone is rude. There are a lot of people who are just nice and happy and they're fun and they're cool. But there is a culture. It's a culture of bullying, and there are things that come out of that, right? There's a hardness that comes from that. There's a meanness that comes from that. There is frankly, what I like to call a fussiness, right? Someone who, like a complaining kind of atmosphere that I think also comes from that. And is that bad? It's just culture, right? The French think the American culture where we're all like, hi, is bizarre, right? They think that's fake, where I just consider it to be polite. Doesn't mean the person's my best friend. It's just, we all have manners. There you have it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I know that you will. As always, I ask that you be respectful in the comments. Unfortunately, you get a little feisty. I'm just gonna delete the comment, right? Because there's some that it's just not necessary. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching. Look forward to hearing your comments. Take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.